In 2009, John Jones was crawling through a cave when he made a grave mistake. He made a wrong turn and believed himself to be crawling through a narrow tunnel, when in reality he was crawling headfirst into a 10 by 18 inch dead-end fissure. He continued pushing further, but by the time he realized it was a dead end, he was already pinned upside down. Fortunately for him, he had some friends with him who were able to get help. Rescuers set up an elaborate pulley system, but the sharp turns made it nearly impossible to pull him out without breaking any bones. Still, they tried, and to their surprise, it worked. The rescuers managed to pull John out to the point where one of them was actually able to see his face, but before they could pull him out any further, the rigging failed and John had slipped back down into the fissure. They decided the only chance they had left was drilling down to him. However, this would take a lot of time and didn't come without risks, such as a cave-in or severe injury to John. But as the hours passed, they barely made any progress, and John started slipping in and out of consciousness, even mentioning how he saw angels and demons surrounding him. Ultimately, John Jones passed away due to cardiac arrest after almost 30 hours pinned upside down.
One of the most successful serial killers in history is never talked about. Let's talk about Giulia Tofana, who was said to have killed around 600 men. That is a lot of men. There is little known about Giulia's life and upbringing. No pictures, nothing. This story takes place in the Renaissance period in Italy. Back then, women didn't really have any rights. Like, at all. They were usually forced into arranged, loveless marriages. In this time, when you got married, your husband owned you. Men had full ownership and control over their wives. Husbands would often beat their wives without any consequence. And unfortunately for the women, divorce was basically non-existent at the time. It wasn't even an option. So safe to say there was a lot of women stuck in abusive and loveless marriages with no way out. That's until Giulia started her little business. Giulia created an odorless, tasteless, and colorless, undetectable poison, and she put it in makeup products. She disguised her poison in beauty products that women could easily keep on their vanity and no one would question it. She called it Acqua Tofana. Pretty cool name. This product would allow women to discreetly kill their husbands over the span of 4 days. A few drops every day, and the initial symptoms would simply seem like a flu. A few more drops the next few days, and it would slowly weaken and eventually kill the men. You're probably wondering how she got away with killing all of these men without anybody noticing. Well, Giulia was very careful. She didn't just sell Acqua Tofana to anyone. Any new client had to be verified by a past client and have a background check. Giulia's clients were actually really protective over her as well and kept her secret. This went on for over 20 years. Giulia would also coach the women on how to act around the days of the poison. After the first day, when the husband starts getting the flu symptoms, to act really concerned and call a doctor. The doctor would come and assume it was just a basic illness, give them medication, and leave. The key was that the women were the ones to call the doctor. They had to act concerned, anxious. When the husbands would eventually die, the doctors would be baffled. And the key to all this was that the women were told to demand an autopsy. But the thing about Acqua Tofana is that it was undetectable in an autopsy, meaning that all of these deaths came back as natural causes.
When this man turned up at a police station, officers had no idea that he was about to confess to one of the most gruesome, heinous cases that Portsmouth has ever seen. This is the case of David Guy. On the 3rd of July 2012, a group of students were taking an evening walk along a beach in Southsea, Hampshire, when they noticed something that looked out of place. On the rocks of the beach, there was a black bin bag, and inside the black bin bag, there was something wrapped up in a pink shower curtain. Curiosity getting the better of one of the students, they pulled back the shower curtain, discovering a dismembered human torso. The police were quickly called, and over the next couple of days, they were able to recover a pair of human legs and a pelvis on separate parts of the beach. The limbs were identified as belonging to 30-year-old David Guy, who was a local man to Southsea. I couldn't find exactly how they were able to make this determination about his identity, but an educated guess would say that it was through DNA. The pathologist who examined David's remains couldn't say for certainty what caused his death. The pathologist didn't have many body parts to actually examine. However, the injuries that were inflicted on the torso gave him a pretty good idea. In the region of where your heart would be, there was a gaping wound, and this led the pathologist to believe that David was likely stabbed with a long sharp blade directly into his heart, which would have killed him instantly. During his autopsy, it was also discovered that some of David's internal organs were missing. Apart from his torso, legs and pelvis, none of David's other remains have ever been found, and this includes his head, his arms and his genitals. Police began to look into David to see who he was, who he hung around with, who was involved in his life, and this is how they came across 46-year-old David Hilda. The two men had been friends for absolutely years, Hilda being known as Big Dave and Guy being known as Little Dave. But their friendship was a very toxic and violent one. Hilda was very much the dominant one out of the two, and he would often belittle or beat or put down Guy. Hilda would allow Guy to come to his flat on Richmond Road to take a shower, have a wash or take a bath. Guy lived in a camper van nearby, but I don't know what his access to water was like if he had to go to Hilda's flat to use his shower, and Hilda would also provide Guy with food. So as you can imagine, Guy was very reliant on Hilda. In exchange for this, Hilda would ask Guy to keep his flat clean and to cat sit his beloved pet Tinker. One day between the 30th of June and the 3rd of July, it's believed that Hilda arrived back to his flat and found it in disarray, that it was completely upside down and that his cat Tinker had been neglected. Guy hadn't been looking after her. Allegedly, this is when Hilda, in a fit of rage, furious at Guy, took a large sharp knife and stabbed Guy straight through the heart. A man who he had been best friends with for years. He would go on to dismember Guy, and he would use his bike, which had a box fitted on the front of it, to dispose of Guy's remains wherever he disposed of them. We know that his torso, legs and pelvis ended up on that beach, but where everything else is still a mystery to this day. On the 5th of July, a very visibly dishevelled Hilda arrived to Shoreham Police Station, which was around about 45 miles away from where Guy's torso was discovered. The police station was actually closed, so Hilda used a free phone to contact the police. He seemed very confused and agitated and told the operator, quote, "I would like to speak to someone. I think I have done something serious. This morning I found a lot of empty Nurofen wrappers in my pocket." When asked if he needed an ambulance, he responded, quote, "I need to speak to a copper first. I think I have killed someone." A police officer would be dispatched to the station and took Hilda inside of the police station to be questioned, and Hilda went with him, no bother. He was described as being very confused. He kept on rambling about something that he had done and that what he did was terrible, but he just couldn't remember what it was. It was just at the back of his mind. After telling the police officer that he think he might have overdosed on the Nurofen that he had taken, he was taken to the hospital to be examined. Meanwhile, police were dispatched to his flat on Richmond Road and went in for a little look around, and nothing stood out to them. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing caused any suspicion. There was no sign of a struggle, nothing like that. It just looked like a regular flat. When Hilda was told this, that police had been to his flat and everything seemed fine, it was said that you could just see the relief that came over him. And Hilda said that this horrible thing that he felt like he had done must have just been in his head. He would be discharged from the hospital and made his way back to Portsmouth. Despite Hilda's flat looking very ordinary and not suspicious, something did stick out to one investigator, and that was Tinker the cat. On the shower curtain that Guy's torso was wrapped up in, they were able to extract 8 cat hairs. These were sent off to a university who were doing some type of research that I'm not going to get into, but they were able to determine that this cat hair had a 1 in 100 chance of belonging to another cat than it did to Tinker. Not to get into it too much, but cat DNA is obviously very different to human DNA, so for the investigators, they were very confident with this 1 in 100 number. They were very confident that the hairs that were found on the shower curtain belonged to Tinker. When they arrived back at Hilda's flat and did a more thorough investigation, they would find fibres that matched the fibres from the shower curtain, and they would also find traces of Guy's blood. David Hilda would be arrested on suspicion of the murder of David Guy. At trial, he would be acquitted of the murder charge and instead was convicted of manslaughter. He was handed a sentence of life imprisonment with a a minimum of 12 years to serve, meaning that if he isn't out already, he could be out any day now.
Christopher Watts, the case is also commonly referred to as the Watts family. This happened in 2018 in Colorado. Christopher killed his entire family. The details on this are truly shocking, devastating. It's a case that truly shocked the entire world. Christopher was married to Shanann Watts. They were both originally from North Carolina, but they lived in Colorado. They met in 2010. Chris sent Shanann a friend request on Facebook. She accepted, and by November 2012, they were married. By 2013, they had bought and moved into a 5-bedroom home. December 17th, 2013, they had their first daughter named Bella. Less than 2 years later, in July 17th, they had their second daughter named Cece. Her name was Celeste, but they called her Cece. Shanann was described as a loving mom, a loving wife. She was a hard worker, a kind friend, and was so in love with her husband, Chris. At the time, she worked from home for a marketing company. She was very, very active on social media. She kind of did like vlog style videos of her lifestyle. She would share a lot of her life and a lot of her husband and her kids. Like those videos that she uploaded of herself and of her children made it that much more shocking to the people looking in and seeing her life after the fact, because we got to see what kind of personality she had, how she was with her kids, and how much of a loving mother she really was. So to know what happened and the details that come with it, truly shocking, disgusting, devastating, all of the above. At the time that her and Chris met, she was at a low point in her life. She was losing a lot of friends. She had just gotten in a really bad car accident and got diagnosed with a bad health condition. I'm pretty sure it was lupus. So when Chris came along, she was over the moon, quickly fell in love with him, and described him as the best thing that has ever happened to her. She talked so highly of Chris. She was so in love with their love at first. She truly felt like the luckiest girl in the world. They quickly became this picture perfect family. From the outside looking in, they really looked like they were a beautiful family, and maybe at one point they were. June 11th, 2018, Shanann records a video of her surprising Chris with a pregnancy announcement. This would be their third child. His reaction, weird. He does this like awkward laugh and goes, that's awesome. Shanann is so excited to be pregnant again. It's posting it all over her social media, updates on the pregnancy, her ultrasounds, and saying that Chris is the best dad the girls could ask for. August 13th, 2018. At this point, Shanann is 34 years old. Unborn baby, they named him Nico. Bella was 4 and Cece was 3. Shanann had been traveling for work that weekend. She gets dropped off by her friend Nicole at 1:48 in the morning. That next morning, Shanann missed a doctor's appointment at 9 in the morning, and her friends immediately grew concerned. By 11:55 that morning, Nicole, the friend that had previously dropped her off the night before, goes over to her house to make sure that she's okay. Nicole was especially concerned because Shanann was pregnant and she had not been feeling well the weekend prior. She sees her car in the garage, but no one's coming to the door, so she ends up calling the police to do a wellness check. When the cops get there, she briefly mentions that Shanann had talked about some marital issues between her and Chris. Cops call Chris to ask him if he knows anything about where she is. He says no, but he says he'll be home in 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, he's home. He lets the cops and Nicole go inside. Walking through the house, and in body cam footage, you can see Nicole is visibly stressed. She's really worried about her friend, especially when they find her cell phone, ID, and wallet in there. Chris, on the other hand, his behavior is weird. He's looking down a lot. He looks stressed, but almost like he's trying to fake it and doing a really bad job at it. The cops ask Chris if they've been having marital issues. Chris says they're going through a separation, but they're in the very beginning stages of it. They haven't filed for divorce. They're just starting the process. He then says they had a little argument in the morning. He went to work around 5:15 a.m. and he has not seen her since. Still walking through, they walk into Shanann and Chris's bedroom and they notice the bed is stripped. The fitted sheet is nowhere to be found. Chris's explanation to that is that Shanann was just washing the sheets. A detective meets them at the house to kind of help with the search. They speak to a neighbor that has security camera footage from his house that points to the Watts family household. In the footage, the only person you see leaving the house is Chris. There's, I think, more than one documentary about this, by the way, and all of this is in there, so I will put a picture of it on the screen. The footage of Chris, when they're going through the security camera footage, I mean, he should have just pled guilty right then and there. He is acting whack. He looks so nervous. He can't stand still. He's looking down, holding his arms above his head. You can see the anxiety pouring out of him. They go through the footage. Chris then steps out of the house. The neighbor stays in the house talking to the officer. Soon as Chris steps out, the neighbor looks at the officer and says, he's not acting right at all. He's acting really fidgety. He doesn't look worried. He looks like he's trying to cover his tracks. August 14th, one day after Shanann and the girls had been reported missing. The FBI gets involved. They begin the first search of the home. Meanwhile, Chris does his first TV interview. We are just just weird. He says they vanished. He doesn't know anything. He hopes that if someone knows something, they come forward. Says that if somebody has her, please bring her back, that this house is not complete without them. And throughout some of these interviews, it looks like he's smiling and almost laughing. That evening, he's taken to the police station to do his first formal interview. He's sticking to his story, saying he doesn't know anything. However, when he's talking about the girls and Shanann, he's referring to them in past tense, saying things such as, she loved these shoes, she loved this dress, she was a girly girl. A bit suspicious. He says he's getting worried now. He's beginning to think that someone may have taken them, but that if someone did take them, it had to be someone that they know, because there was no sign of anyone forcing an entry into the home. Cops are trying to get more information out of him about his marriage problems, and he just says, I would never cheat on my wife. What Christopher fails to know is that while he's being interviewed, the cops have already figured out that he has been having an affair. Investigators have found email evidence of Chris having an affair with his co-worker, Nicole Kessinger. I think that's how you say her last name. And Nicole was actually being questioned at the exact same time. And I can make a whole video about what Nicole does and doesn't know. She ends up lying to the police. She's a whole mess herself, to be honest. Nicole claims that Chris told her he was separated and almost done with the divorce. She says it wasn't until after the disappearance that she figured out that Chris was lying and that Shanann was pregnant. Moving on to the next day, August 15th, 2018. Chris goes to the police station that morning to take a polygraph test. His dad has also flown into Colorado to support his son. If I'm not mistaken, a polygraph test is considered failed if it's -4 or below. Christopher gets a -18. He fails miserably. They sit him down and tell him it was completely clear that you were not honest during this test, so now it's time to talk about what really happened. And Chris says, I didn't lie, I promise. They kind of switch the tactic and they say, Chris, you are in here today lying about something else. And immediately he says, I cheated on her. And they say, I know. He says Shanann accused him of it. He denied her and he felt horrible because she was pregnant, still using past tense. Investigators eventually decide to bring Chris's dad in and leave them to talk alone in the room in hopes that he would confess to his father, someone that he trusts. This is all recorded, by the way, so definitely look up those videos after this. The dad comes in, sits down. He says, do you want to tell me about what's going on? Chris is almost whispering. He's being so silent, and he says, I don't want to protect her, referring to Shanann. The dad says, you don't want to protect her? Did she hurt them? And Chris very quietly says, yeah, and then pauses and says, and then I killed her. His father says, what now? And Chris says, I hurt her. He says that Shanann killed both Cece and Bella, that she strangled them to death, and that in a rage, he killed his pregnant wife and got rid of the bodies because he freaked out and didn't know what to do. The poor dad, this is the little girl's grandfather, and he's sitting there listening to him confess that they are dead and that he killed the wife. Investigators come back into the room eventually, and this is the first time that Chris shed some tears. First time he's cried in this whole entire time. I don't know if he was crying real tears, but this is the first time that he was looking like it. Now the priority is to find the bodies. Where are the bodies? Chris says the bodies are in the oil field where he worked. They're flying drone cameras over the oil field, and you can see on the ground the fitted sheet that was missing from their bedroom. At the stations, the investigators put a picture in front of Chris, the drone picture of the oil field. They ask him to mark where the bodies are. He marks an S for Shanann out in the grass, a B for Bella in one oil tank, and a C for Cece in the other oil tank. Chris Watts had put his 3- and 4-year-old daughter's bodies inside of these oil tanks, massive tanks filled with oil, water, and a lot of toxic fumes. He was finally arrested that same day. Within 2 weeks, as part of a plea deal in exchange to not seek the death penalty, Chris Watts finally confessed to killing both of his daughters. Now let's talk about what really happened that night. The night before Shanann came home from her trip, Chris tucked the girls in around 7:45 p.m. He then spent almost 2 hours on the phone with his girlfriend Nicole. We know Shanann came home that night at 1:48 in the morning. That next morning, and I didn't know this detail until I was just looking it up again, Chris went to each of his daughter's rooms and smothered them with pillows until he thought they were dead. Then goes back into the bedroom, starts arguing with Shanann, strangles her. He later says he thought about stopping. When his hands were around her neck, he thought about stopping, but he knew if he stopped, she would still prevent him from being with his girlfriend. Her eyes filled with blood, and he just stared at her until the life left her body. He started wrapping up her body in the sheets when his 2 little daughters came walking in the room. He didn't know how it was possible. He thought that he had already killed them. He said Bella kept asking what's wrong with mommy, and then both girls started crying. He dragged Shanann's body downstairs and into the truck, and then asked his 2 little daughters to get in the truck with him, then proceeded to drive in the truck an hour away to the oil field with his dead wife's body in the car and his 2 daughters that were still alive. Once they're there, he takes Cece Casey smothers her with her blanket, then goes up the stairs and drops her body in an oil tank. He walks back to the truck where his little daughter Bella just saw all of this going on. She's crying, she's terrified. Bella asks her dad that she trusts, that she loves, if he was going to do to her what he just did to her sister Cece. He then smothers Bella with her blanket and drops her body off in the oil tank next to her sister. He later says that throughout this whole thing, he looked at them and felt absolutely nothing. He then buried Shannon in a shallow grave that he dug up. As far as information that came to light throughout the investigation, his affair with Nicole, they were fully dating. He would go on dates, go on trips together. They spent a lot of time together. Shanann had been suspicious of an affair. She even texted her friends about how they were having issues and how distant Chris was being. Shanann texted her friends that he wouldn't touch her, he wouldn't kiss her, and he had actually told Shanann that they were not compatible anymore and that he didn't love her anymore. Shanann suggested couples therapy. Chris shut it down immediately and said that he just wasn't happy and he didn't want another baby. At one point, Shanann told her friend that she asked Chris if he was having an affair, and he said no. And Shanann's friend asked her, do you believe him? And she said, honestly, no. November 6th, Chris Watts pleaded guilty. November 19th, he was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, an additional 48 years for the unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy, and 36 years for 3 charges of tampering with a deceased body.
When a teenager was out late hiding from his parents, he spotted his dad driving past. He had no idea he just witnessed his dad disposing of his mum's dead body. It was the 25th of October 1987 in New Rockford, North Dakota. Kathy Bonderson was a 35-year-old nurse working in the local hospital. She was married to Robert Bonderson. At around 2 a.m. on the day in question, the pair were arguing over their teenage son, Jamie. He'd worried them by not returning home, and Kathy was particularly stressed because she was going to be late for work. It's believed that Robert looked for Jamie and was unsuccessful and returned home. At 2:30 a.m, Jamie, who was parked with his girlfriend out near a bridge, spotted Kathy's car. Now, Jamie actually ducked low to avoid being seen by his parents. He had no idea what he'd actually just witnessed. An hour later, Kathy's car was found on fire. Tragically, she was in the passenger seat, deceased. Now, a sheriff called Ed Alamaris claimed that the fire began due to a freak accident in which Kathy had crashed the car and it had set on fire. He said that her body must have been flung over to the passenger side. However, clues at the car indicated this was no accident. Her car keys were found undamaged on the floor of the car, which was strange as the whole of the interior had melted. There were also no sort of tire marks indicating that there had been any kind of crash. There was also no structural damage to the vehicle indicating that there had been any impact. There was also suspiciously a can of petrol found nearby. The autopsy also indicated that Kathy had been killed prior to the fire, as she had no carbon monoxide in her lungs. Injuries to her neck suggested she'd been murdered. Despite all of this, the stubborn sheriff decided not to change the ruling of the death from an accident to a homicide. Years later, in November 2005, the case was finally reopened. By this point, the sheriff had passed away. Investigators started looking into Kathy's husband, Robert. By this point, Robert had moved to Wyoming. Police re-interviewed him and he tellingly went missing as soon as they did so. It wasn't until April 2006 that police discovered his dead body in a remote cabin in the woods. He had taken his own life. Investigators determined that Robert was the real killer of Kathy. He had the opportunity to kill her and he also had a motive. It was revealed that he'd been seeing multiple different women while he was with Kathy. He'd also taken out a huge life insurance policy prior to her death. Jamie, Robert's son, also confirmed that it was Robert that was driving Kathy's car on the night of the murder. Jamie's girlfriend, who was with him at the time, also confirmed this.
Have you ever had a friend that likes the things you wear, likes the things you do, becomes almost obsessive with you that it gets to the point where it's uncomfortable? This story is that, but to the absolute worst level imaginable. Let's talk about it. This was in 1999. We're talking about Rachel Barber. This is in Melbourne, Australia. I think I'm saying Melbourne right. If I'm not, I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments. Rachel grew up in a really loving household with her mom, dad, and 2 little sisters. She was a dancer and she loved it. She was awesome at it. It started off when they were younger and they would choreograph little dances to do for their parents, and then she ended up following that path and wanting to pursue it as a career. Got really good at it and was becoming kind of successful at that. Rachel was a stunning girl. She fell into the modeling world. She started doing ballet. She was very into fitness, very athletic girl. She eventually wanted to pursue her passion for dancing and make an actual profession out of it. She ended up asking her parents to leave normal high school and become a full-time student at the dance factory in Melbourne, Australia. Her parents agree, so she throws herself into this world of dancing and becomes really dedicated at it. March 1st, 1999, it was a normal day. She got up, started getting ready, got dressed, got her backpack on, doing her usual morning routine. Usually she would take a train to a friend's house, and then from there they would ride to the dance academy together. Rachel was very wary of public transportation. She was also scared of the dark, so every time to and from the train station, her parents would give her a ride. Rachel gets dropped off around 9:30 in the morning. At 6:15, her dad is going to pick her up back at that same train station. She gets to the dance academy around 10:15. She's really excited that day. She's telling her friends all about how she has received this really cool opportunity that she's going to get paid for, but she can't say what it is. She wasn't allowed to give many details. All she could say was that she was meeting an old friend for a really big opportunity that she was going to get paid for, so she was looking forward to that night. Dance ends around 5:30. She meets up with her boyfriend Manny, and they start walking towards the train station together. They eventually go their separate ways because she's going to take a different train that she usually does. Her dad goes to pick up Rachel at the train station around 6:15. They usually got back home at 6:30, 6:45 for the latest, so the mom and the 2 little sisters are waiting back at home. It's around 7:15. They're not home yet. 7:30, 7:40 comes around and the mom is now concerned. The dad calls the mom back at home, lets her know that Rachel never showed up to the train station and is asking if maybe she just came home, but the mom says no. So now they're both concerned. They call the police department to let them know their daughter didn't come home. Police just basically disregarded it. They said the same thing they say in a lot of these cases, that teenagers run away all the time and that she's probably gonna come home later. Rachel's mom calls the boyfriend Manny, asking if he knows anywhere about where she might be. Manny tells her that that day she was talking about this cool opportunity she had, how she was gonna meet up with an old friend, and Manny says maybe they're together. With that information, Rachel's parents start calling all of her friends, asking if they know anything about where she is, but nobody does. The next morning, they go back to the police station to officially file a missing persons report, and the cops just kind of disregard it. They're just not interested. They say she's a teenager, this is normal behavior. Even though the parents are saying no, she would never do this, they just seemed like they didn't care. Meanwhile, last night, as well as this next morning, her parents are starting to retrace all of her steps, going to the dance studio, showing pictures of her to people, asking if they know anything, go to different train stations, go to different shops, trying to get any sort of lead that would let them know where she had gone. Volunteers are involved, staff from the dance academy are involved, friends and family are just walking around, calling different hospitals, seeing if there's any sign of her at all, kind of just conducting their own little search. They try and get phone call records, calling different businesses. Businesses are now helping more than the cops are, which is crazy. End up going to a different police station because the first one wasn't doing anything, and that police station tells them that they can't officially file a missing persons report because they already did that with the last one. So just out of luck, which is so crazy. Their daughter is missing. So the police, in my opinion, are just not taking the family seriously. They tell them that they're going to start questioning people at the dance academy. They don't. They're giving them sort of false promises, but at the same time not caring a lot, because they tell the family to maybe go look for her here, go look for her there, but like they don't want to go look for her. I don't know. I'm stressed. She was last seen March 1st. March 4th, the police finally decide to question Manny, her boyfriend, and they say, oh, Rachel probably got pregnant and she ran away, right? Like, that's why she's hiding. And Manny's like, literally, no, what are you talking about? The cops actually tell Rachel's parents, Rachel is gone, she ran away. You should just get therapy and focus on your other 2 daughters for now. Of course, they're not going to do that, so they took matters into their own hands, trying to lead their own investigation, trying to get tips and leads that hopefully lead somewhere. They end up getting some sort of tip they take to the police on March 6th. The cops are like, we've already given you a bunch of our effort, so we don't have any more effort to give. The mom goes bananas. I don't think I've ever said bananas before like that. The mom goes nuts and she cries. She's losing it because her daughter is lost and no one's looking for her. One of Rachel's friend's older sister, her name is Allison, she saw a missing persons flyer and she called in and said that she had actually seen Rachel at a train station about an hour after the dance class was over that day she went missing. She says she saw them at this train station and she was talking to a girl. They seemed really friendly. They were comfortable with each other, laughing. Allison says she overheard the conversation and Rachel and this girl were talking about some sort of money that Rachel was excited to get. Police are finally doing something helpful. They bring in Allison to describe this girl to try and see if they could come up with a sketch of what she might look like. They also finally agreed to let Rachel's family do a public appeal. So finally there's news coverage on this case and people are looking for Rachel. The next morning, the cops have this sketch of this girl that she was seen talking to, and they show it to the parents. The parents are thinking of who this girl might be. They think of Caroline Reed Robertson, a 19-year-old girl that used to babysit for the family. Rachel's family and Caroline's family met 7 years prior. The families used to be neighbors and they had 3 daughters as well, so they kind of bonded over that. They lost touch when Rachel's family moved out of the neighborhood, so they hadn't talked in a while. Caroline was 6 years older than Rachel, so she was a little bit older, which is why she would babysit. The family remembers that 6th day after Rachel went missing, Caroline called the home phone and said, "I'm sorry you're going through this. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help." That was what brought up Caroline's name to their mind, because they remembered that she had called, and they remember that she has an apartment in the location where Rachel was last seen. Rachel's mom also remembered that sometime last year, Caroline had called the family home to talk to Rachel to let them know about some sort of modeling job that Rachel could get paid for. With that information, she takes that to the police, and the police start looking into Caroline. Again, she went missing March 1st. They're looking at phone records and they see that Caroline called Rachel February 28th. The first time they spoke for 15 minutes, the second time they spoke for almost 30 minutes. Now that Rachel's mom starts thinking back on it, she remembers when Caroline called and remembers Rachel being excited about some sort of opportunity. Authorities go to Caroline's place of work to question her, but she's not there. She actually has been sick since March 1st, which is the day Rachel went missing. Authorities go talk to Caroline's neighbors to see if they know anything, and someone says that March 2nd, they heard scream crying coming from Caroline's bedroom. Caroline's dad also said that he visited her apartment because she was sick, and she remembers that Caroline was keeping her door shut at all times. She wouldn't open it. Guys, now get this. March 3rd, Caroline has some people come to her apartment to help remove some items. She says she wants to get rid of this statue that is wrapped up in 2 rugs and stuffed in a duffel bag. The removal people take this statue, put the bag in the car, and transfer it to Caroline's father's farm that's around an hour away. March 12th, 1999, detectives go to Caroline's apartment to try and question her. They go up in the morning, but no one's answering the door, so they leave. They come back around 5:30 and break into the apartment. They find Caroline face down in her bedroom floor. She had had a seizure. She also had some sort of green hair dye in her hair. She's rushed to the hospital. Caroline's in the hospital, but some officers stay behind to search the apartment. They don't find much, but they do find notebooks. In these notebooks, and more additional evidence I'll get into, they find so much incriminating evidence showing that Caroline was trying to change her identity. They find the hair dye. They find plans for her to have plastic surgery, clothing in different sizes that don't fit her but fit Rachel. Most shocking of all, and this is literally giving me goosebumps just talking about it, they find an application for a birth certificate in Rachel Barber's name. Caroline Robertson had all these plans to take over Rachel Barber's life, steal her identity, and pretend to be her somewhere else. Back at the hospital, when she regains consciousness and comes back to it, they ask her about Rachel, and she says, "Yeah, she's dead. I buried her." Caroline tells police that she killed Rachel in her apartment, kept her body there for 2 days, and then hired help to move her body to her father's farm, which was that statue. The police, of course, go to the father's farm. They dig up Rachel's body, and for the first time since her disappearance, they see her face. She is deceased, and she has a cord wrapped around her neck. It was ruled that she died the night she went missing on March 1st, and I'm pretty sure her autopsy was strangulation. Once Caroline was discharged, she was immediately taken into custody awaiting trial. The cops are looking into this. The more they dig into it, the more they find. Turns out Caroline was struggling a lot with her mental health. She was suffering from depression, and she had deep-rooted self-esteem issues. She viewed herself so poorly, was so insecure, and hated herself. Caroline would often write letters to her father about how she was getting bullied and she needed help. She said she was a tortured, lost soul that needed someone to help her. So insecure in both her physical appearance as well as everything internal. Caroline was so envious and jealous of Rachel. She looked up to her so much. She thought that she was perfect. Investigators found journals in Caroline's apartment writing about this. She would describe Rachel as strikingly attractive with very clear pale skin and hypnotic green eyes. And then she would write about herself, describing herself as a pizza face with brown oily hair and no coordination, which is obviously very, very sad, and that sucks. That's horrible. But she became so incredibly obsessed with Rachel. She looked up to her that it turned dangerous. Obviously, she ended up killing her. She was trying to learn and memorize everything about Rachel, about her family, about her hobbies, everything she needed to know so that she could become her. What happened was that Caroline reached out to Rachel, told her about this opportunity that she was going to come over to her apartment and that she was going to participate in a psychological study. She told her not to tell anyone about the study or she would potentially ruin the results. Rachel came over. Caroline told her that they would start this study by doing some meditation. She told Rachel to think about things to make her happy. And when Rachel closed her eyes, she put a cord around her neck and strangled her. And we know all this information from Caroline, but also from her journal. She would write about it. She would write things such as, Rachel, toxic over her mouth, put body into army bags and disfigure and dump somewhere way out. Another note said, check farm, including bag, Tuesday arrange bank loan, moving van, night to disguise hair, thoroughly clean house, and steam clean carpet. I'm scared. March 13th, 1999, she's officially charged with the murder of Rachel Barber. November 29th, 2000, she shows up to court looking completely different. She had lost a lot of weight. She had completely different hair. She looked like an entirely different person. Some people think that while she was in prison, she was still putting in effort to look like Rachel and turn into Rachel. The judge in the case said that her actions of this premeditated murder were extremely disturbing and showed that she had a devious mind and manipulative abilities. Caroline was diagnosed with a personality disorder after the murder. The judge said she was a real danger to any who may become the unfortunate subject of her fixation, which I agree. In prison, her cellmates and anyone that talked to her said she never expressed any regret, any remorse for what she did. She was sentenced to 20 years, but she only spent 15 years in prison before she was released on parole in 2015.